running from one thing to another. Amazing, amazing. So a massive welcome to everyone, to all our attendees, to our panelists. It is absolutely amazing and such a joy to have you all with us. My name is Ari Poyers, and I'm going to be your co-host this evening. I'm going to introduce everyone else on the screen very soon, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, what I do, and then we're going to do a quick check-in, and we're going to then get straight into it. So my name is Ari Poyers. As I said, I'm the founder of Happy Schools. A little bit about me: I've been in education for nearly 10 years. I know I don't look like I've nearly been in education for about 10 years, but it's been a crazy, amazing journey. This year, at the beginning of this year, I opened up Happy Schools, which is an emotional intelligence consultancy for schools, where we go and develop social and emotional learning, which we're going to learn, and really, which is the topic tonight, and we're going to learn a lot about it. So I'm so excited to be learning with you all over, with all of you tonight. Even though I can't see you, I'm just waving and sending so much love your way, and so excited for you to meet everyone. Before we begin, I also want to just take a moment to have a bit of gratitude. First of all, I want to say a massive thank you to all of you, to everyone who's attended over here tonight, to the teachers, the parents, the coaches, the social workers, the leaders, the therapists, everyone who comes and shows up all the time for doing what you do. You really are the unsung heroes, and it's because of your work and dedication that we can do what we do. It's really a special job, and you inspire us to do this. So really, thank you so much for showing up here tonight. Whether you're live, whether you're watching the recording, it's really special to have you here. And I just want you to know that you are the role models that your kids need and deserve. So thank you for being here. Massive thank you also to Tova, who is behind the scenes tonight. Tova from Together We Connect. Very much clapping. Together We Connect is a fantastic platform which Tova started to provide spaces for people in the educational field to talk and to share their stories, their visions, and their hearts. So thank you so much, Tova. We're going to share how you can get in contact with her at the end. And then also, lastly, and definitely not least, a massive thank you to our panelists. Number one will start in my top left-hand corner with Mandy. I met Mandy a couple of months ago, and she will introduce herself properly, but I met her a couple of months ago, and really, Mandy is the kindest, warmest educator, one of the kindest, warmest educators I've ever come across. So I cannot wait for you to learn from her. And something why I asked her to come and join us tonight is just her relationship, her rapport with every single student in her school is unbelievable. So there's so much we can learn. We're so excited to learn from you, Mandy, tonight. And joining us, so thank you, Mandy. And joining us all the way from America, we've got all the way from Penn University, Taylor Hausberg. It is such a privilege and honor to have you here. I met Taylor a couple of months ago when I actually took her course in social emotional learning at Pennsylvania University. And I was really just inspired by her love for social emotional learning, which she's going to share with us tonight. So it's absolutely fantastic to have you here, Taylor. I cannot wait to learn more from you. And lastly, to my co-host and my brother, Josh Poyers, it's absolutely fantastic to have you here tonight, Josh. Josh is a mentor to me, a guide and a sage in all that I do. So thank you so much, Josh. Cool. So before we begin, I'm going to just share my screen over here. And what we're going to do is something a little bit different. So if you have got if you've got a phone by you, or you have got a computer, if you're logged onto your computer, then you can go and open this up on your phone. And what you should see on the screen over here is something that says S.E.L webinar, and it's got Mentimeter. I just want to check with the other panelists that this is showing on the screen. We know how it is with Zoom. And what you can do is you can log in by going to www.menti.com and put in the code, or you can scan the QR code. You just go onto your photo on your phone, onto your camera, and you look into you point it at the screen on the QR code, and then it should come up. So I can see people already getting it. So what you can do is also there's quite a bit of fun we can have, is you can tell us how you're feeling today. If you're feeling happy and you're feeling loving, and you can put a heart. I can see a lot of thumbs up and hearts come in. If you're not feeling so great, negative emotions are fine. They're teaching us something. So that's okay if you've had one of those days. And if you are feeling, I don't know what that cat is over there in the side. I'm going to click on it now, but the cat is just a whole lot of fun. I don't know if it's a tongue or a cat. It's just a nice way to start us off. Question mark is if you don't have a clue how you're feeling. So this is something that you can actually use in your classroom. You can use it with your employees. It's a really wonderful way to connect. So I can see so many people have already joined us on Mentimeter. So we just going to do a little get to know you, which is a core pillar of Happy Schools. We always want to build a rapport and a connection with the students, with the teachers, with the parents that we do a session with. So we are going to go and get this underway. So where are you joining us from? This is the first question. Please put in where in the world are you joining us from? I know we've got an international audience over here. So put it in and press submit. Oman is wonderful. Someone is very lucky, right by Cape Town. Oman is South Africa, Johannesburg. Yes, let's try to be as specific as we can. Cape Town, oh, fantastic. Hey, Delaware, wow, this is amazing. Hi, Delaware. New York, wow. Such an amazing, amazing array of different people. Austin, Texas, Westcliff, Johannesburg, Fairmount. Fantastic. This is so exciting to see people from all over the world coming together. And this is what it's about, right? Is really building a community from around the world, right? From Florida, Cape Town, all around the world. I know we got some people from England. I saw that we also had someone from Canada. So wow, it is so special to be connecting with people from all over the world. Thank you so much for joining, whatever time zone you're in. And I know people from Australia have asked us to record this because they're going to be getting it later. So a massive shout out to all of you. Thank you, everyone. And as our last check-in, what we're going to do is I'm going to go and open up our mood meter. On your phone, okay, you might have to manually go to the next slide, but you can see a fantastic tool called a mood meter has just appeared. A mood meter is a brilliant tool that Yale University, specifically Mark Brackett, he's a very special human who's doing amazing work in this field, has actually created for us to help check in with our students. And just to explain it, if you understand how it works, and you can put down your emotion, but what happens is if you look at the top left on your screen, on your personal phone screen, is what you can see is this is someone who is high energy and unpleasant. So someone who is feeling angry or like very upset, you know, with the world. If you're feeling in the red quadrant, maybe you're feeling in the blue quadrant, you're feeling you're not feeling high energy, you're feeling low energy, but you're feeling tired, or you're feeling glum, you're feeling down. Okay? Maybe you over there in the green, on the right of that, the green, and the green is you're calm, you're chill, you're relaxed, okay? You've taken a big deep breath in and you're relaxed, okay? Or maybe you're in the top right-hand corner, and this is how I am most of the time, is, you know, energetic and bubbly and optimistic. So you can put what you are feeling, and you can see we're developing a little bit of a word cloud, and the words which are put there more frequently actually appear bigger. So it's so wonderful to see that we've got blessed over there, but we've also got tired. And that is so normal. I was expecting that with, you know, with teachers, with educators, with parents. It is a tiring job. So thank you for sharing that. And we've got content, we've got cheerful. I don't know if anyone in Johannesburg saw the sunset, but it really made me feel blessed today. You know, and as I always say, is that there's a sunset every day. It's if we choose to watch it or not. So, you know, this is something that we can think about. Many of us are feeling drained, especially, you know, in the pandemic, post-pandemic, this weird stage we're in. So thank you for sharing. And everyone, this is a fantastic tool that you can use to start off your meetings at work. to check in with your kids, to check in with your classrooms. It is absolutely amazing and helps us build our emotional intelligence when we can label our feelings. So thank you so much for sharing. We're going to end off with the Mentimeter presentation. And yeah, thank you so much all for sharing. I really, really appreciate that. Okay, fantastic. What we are going to do is quickly just a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Josh to introduce our topic. So just first of all, feel free to put any questions you want in the chat. We will have a bit of a question and answer session later, and please feel free to do that. Also, we will be providing a resource sheet with a recording and emails, our panelists' emails, if you have questions that aren't answered in this specific forum. We'll also be putting our social media where you can connect with us and see the work that we are all doing. And lastly, I'm going to hand over now to Josh. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And yeah, take it away, Josh.
Awesome. Thanks, Ari. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's really, really exciting. And, you know, it's such a difficult topic to introduce simply because it's absolutely monumental. When you think about humans and you realize that emotions are so much of what makes us who we are. And then you think about, you know, add children into the mix and education and talking about growing people at stages where, you know, their personalities are forming. It's an absolutely fascinating discussion. And so I thought probably the best way to kind of, I guess, introduce this particular topic is, I think, to explain why we are at a very exciting juncture in world history in terms of our ability to actually, I would say, be at a place where we can actually really start to merge what academia is discovering and what's going on in real life. And essentially what's happened is that for the longest time, psychology, where, you know, the kind of emotions are studied, was very much about helping people who were not okay. You know, so if someone was having mental difficulties of any sort, you know, then psychology was really researching that and practically trying to help alleviate those sorts of things. But as, I guess, psychology developed, what's really one of the, I think, the most important, I guess, evolutions, and this is something that Martin Seligman, who was the president of the American Psychological Association, he brought up this idea that, you know, no, psychology is not just about people who are sick. It's about people who are normal, and yet how do we make normal life a little bit better than normal? What are the things that we know about how to get human beings to function at a higher level than maybe baseline, even if that baseline isn't, you know, even if there's no mental illness involved? And what that really opened up for was a perspective of the world that we're not just people who are reactive to kind of what gets thrown our way, but we started actively seeking out ways of becoming better. And research really from there fundamentally started speaking to the concept that, hey, we can actually research how to improve people. So that's kind of the first point that I want to lay out, this idea that there was a fundamental shift within psychology. But the exciting thing is it wasn't just psychology. Now, economics is obviously a massive discipline and you know, very much considered by I guess people who are not as what they call, I guess, soft or airy fairy or fluffy. It's kind of like a social science that people find, you know, based on facts. There's a lot of mathematics and numbers. And what went behind that, not just, you know, beyond the numbers, was this deep, profound belief that human beings were rational. That in many ways, I think later psychologists and later economists would almost think that the original economists almost made economics in their image, you know, that they're describing people's behavior in the way that they thought of themselves as behaving. But what thankfully I think has started to happen is the realization that, you know, people aren't as rational as we think. And to the extent that, you know, Jonathan Haidt, one of the most famous moral psychologists in the world, he speaks about the idea of almost our rational mind as being this kind of almost puny little rider on top of our emotions, which are this elephant. Right. And if the elephant really decides to do something, the rider doesn't have much of a chance of reining it in. And obviously, this is up for debate. I mean, you know, the different opinions. But why I love that so much is because I think if you take a second to stop and think about yourself, I think you definitely have days where what Jonathan Hart is speaking about resonates a whole lot more than, thinking of yourself as this purely rational person who kind of, never does something strange and never gets overwhelmed to the extent, that you make a bad decision. So from an economics perspective, what behavior economics has really brought in this era where people from other disciplines now are starting to be a lot more interested in emotion. It's becoming a lot more okay to speak about emotion and to study emotion. So I think that's the second major development. And there's one third development that I want to speak to, and then I'll introduce myself. And I think this really links is that there's a fundamental idea in psychology that I think has started to happen, is that we've started to realize that people can grow, that people can learn, with the work of Carol Dweck, which is also, again, and with mindset and the concept that our mindset really fundamentally often deeply, kind of controls whether we become better or worse, believing that you're not going to be able to improve kind of seals the deal, whereas believing improving is possible really can change the outcomes. And then kind of the work that's been done in intelligence and realizing that, there are different kinds of intelligences, the work by Howard Gardner, the Harvard professor who came up with this theory of multiple intelligences, and obviously at Yale University where they discovered emotional intelligence, if you want to call it that. And, then Daniel Goleman, the journalist who kind of popularized it. And, there's this really rich history. And I think why it resonates with people is this deep idea that humans can change. Humans can change, we can grow. And if you put it all together, what I'm really trying to build a case for is this idea that what is the role of people in our times in terms of from a psychological, educational, economic, a whole bunch of these perspectives. It's to kind of realize, wait, what are the ways that human beings are not optimized in terms of the fact that we need to be honest about that we can really be very irrational and not in control of ourselves? And how do we get to being better? And obviously, we look at it at different phases of the lifespan. And I think this is why social and emotional learning is so important, because obviously, being a kid, you're the most open to growth. You've got the most time dedicated for growth. And fundamentally, what we're here to do is to really understand how is it that we take these learnings from psychology and find a way to actually teach our kids. Now, I'm not going to try and give the answers. That's, our wonderful panelists who are really far more learned in that, both from, I think, an academic and from a practical perspective. But just to end off why I deeply believe in this is that, so I actually grew up and I was brain damaged at birth, severely so, and I had to go to remedial school. And as I was reflecting on the webinar tonight, obviously, when you go to remedial school, everyone's worried about kind of your technical skills when you try and mainstream, which I was able to do in grade 2. But what I realized thinking about it was that no one really asked the question whether emotionally and, socially I had actually fallen behind. And it's actually very logical, because when you're in a class with everyone who's kind of got learning disabilities, your frame of reference is kind of, these sorts of people. And kids who grow up in kind of different environments often have very different social norms. And, there's higher expectations, if that makes sense. And what I realized is that often I would get into fights with people and all sorts of things when I was a young kid. And it didn't help that I was ADD and I thought, Ritalin was for weird kids. But I really didn't have good social skills. And I remember distinctly being at a time where, I think, Ari was actually invited to a birthday party and whatever, I wasn't. And I realized because I don't think I'm very nice to this person. And I started realizing that, wait a minute, there are these people around me who people seem to like, and what are they doing? And so I really started observing, and, it helped that I finally got Ritalin and I actually was able to take us, have much more impulse control. I started realizing there were real habits and behaviors. And as I started looking at these people and implementing them in a more consistent way, people started treating me very differently. And I started thinking of myself very differently. And my whole personality changed to being someone who, no one really often didn't want to invite me, ended up, being kind of at every party and having a lot of friends. So I really believe that, number one, we can change. And I think that number two, now that we know that we can and that the world kind of has figured a lot of this out, I think we have an obligation to help our kids to get there. So with that being said, I'm going to hand over to Ari to kind of, help introduce our panelists.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Josh. for that wonderful introduction. Very insightful and very personal. So thank you for sharing. Talking about introductions, I would love it. We're going to hear now from Taylor and from Mandy. Taylor, can you please first tell us your story of how you got involved, or a little bit about your journey and also how you got involved in education, and then Mandy once Taylor is done. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the invitation. Echoing Ari and Josh, thank you to everyone on this call for carving out this time and space. I'm just feeling really grateful to be in your company. And Josh, thank you for starting us off with sharing your story in such a vulnerable and touching way. So everyone, my name is Taylor Hausberg. I am currently a doctoral student at the University of Pennsylvania, but my story and journey into education, as all of us, started when I was a child. I was one of those perhaps unusual children who really liked school. And I think that was largely because I was very blessed to be in a very safe and warm school community with teachers who I felt truly loved me and cared for me. And I really found it to be a safe haven from the family conflict and trauma that I experienced at home. And so when I graduated from college, I really didn't know what to do or what I wanted to do, other than the fact that I wanted to do something related to social justice, where I could see a tangible impact. And so, putting those two things together, a logical choice seemed to be joining a program called Teach for America. I'm not sure if that's also in South Africa, but it's a 2-year program where they take mostly recent college graduates and give you a very quick 2-month training and then kind of throw you into a classroom in a school district that really suffers from high teacher turnover rates. And so that is how I landed in a middle school math classroom in Oakland, California. And I taught there for 2 years. And then after that 2 years, I felt really committed to education, but I wanted to experience the world as a young 20-something. And so I ended up, long story short, teaching university level English in Kigali, Rwanda for a year. And what I enjoyed most during those 3 years was really, teaching the academics, teaching math, teaching English was wonderful, but I really loved the kind of in between times, before class, during lunch, between classes, when I was able to talk to my students about life, about what was going on with them, just really get to know them and understand, their life story, and kind of serve as a mentor to my students. And so after those 3 years, I felt very committed to working in education, but I was also really curious to explore other parts of the education field. And so I took I kind of think of it now as a detour. I returned to my alma mater, Duke University, and I worked in admissions for a year. But I felt very removed from students during that year, and I really missed working more closely with teachers and being embedded in a school community. And so after 1 year there, again, there's kind of a longer story behind this, but I decided to return to the classroom, and I ended up in Pune, India this time. And I got a job teaching middle school and high school leadership. And now that was only because the math and the English positions were taken, and they had this one, last leadership position open. And, initially I was a little uncertain about taking it, simply because to me it seemed like, one of those kind of fluff classes, like a study hall that you have to take, but you don't really care about, and it's like an easy pass. So I was pretty uncertain going into it, but I ended up loving it for so many reasons. I mean, because I was new to the community, I really designed a curriculum that was as open as possible and as student-centered as possible, which allowed students to kind of take the rein and drive what this class was going to look like. And so we essentially followed what's called a youth participatory action research model, or a YPAR model, where students identify issues in their communities that they care about, like hunger, hygiene, gender discrimination. And then once they identify that issue, they gather data about it through surveys, through interviews with community members. And then they eventually, throughout the year, learn about leadership principles and apply them to create a small-scale community intervention. And so, just a few examples. I had one student who created a community garden in her neighborhood. Another student who ended up creating signs for the public bathroom around hygiene practices. Students organizing street plays, petitions, just a really wide range of projects. And I just saw so much potential in this sort of class, in this sort of education. And really, that was the experience that opened my eyes and said, actually, experiences like this kind of achieve the best of every world. We're developing critical thinking, and at the same time, allowing space for personal, social growth that is just so important to being happy and thriving today. So I decided that I really wanted to learn more about how to teach kind of these soft skills like leadership. And I eventually ended up in applying and enrolling in a doctoral program where I am now at the University of Pennsylvania. And more specifically, I study social emotional learning, teacher education and professional development, and curriculum design. So I work at the intersection of those three areas. Since I've been at Penn, I've had the opportunity to run a few professional development programs for in-service educators, for novice teachers and student teachers. And then I know we'll talk a little bit about this later, but I also am a teaching assistant and work with Dr. Angela Duckworth. And so have had exposure to the field of S.E.L. in various ways. I don't know where this path leads next, but I just know that through all of this, I feel very committed to building happy and healthy school communities by finding ways to bring more social emotional learning and really integrate it into the fabric of our school days, integrate it with academic learning so that, it's not siloed, but really a part of everything that we do as educators.
Awesome. Thank you, Taylor. It's so lovely to be on this panel with you, and thank you to Ari and Josh and Tova. Quick introduction from me. My name is Mandy Herold. I am based in Johannesburg in South Africa, and just a quick shout out, Ari, if I may, especially to my friend Joe in Geneva and Laurie in Texas. So very, very chuffed that they are joining us, and lots of other local closer to home, but those two from further away. So I have been working in schools in Johannesburg for 20 years, and I've been in a position of leadership where I am now as the head teacher or principal of a small independent prep school. And I look after boys between the ages of 5 and 9 and their parents and our school family and the staff as well. And my passion for social and emotional learning, I guess I've always known that there's more to learning than academics, or more to school and education than academics. And a few years ago, I heard Dr. Becky Bailey speak at a conference in Cape Town, and I had like a visceral reaction, like something in my body. I even feel like emotional just talking about it now, because as I learned more about conscious discipline from 2017, 2018, 2019, it's wrapped words around what my heart knows to be true about how we show up for ourselves and how we help those, how we can learn and unlearn and relearn for ourselves and for the little people that we work with. And it's really been a transformational journey for me. And yeah, I've also got a passion for coaching. So in April this year, I did a course to become an executive coach, and so nearly got the certification for that. And as you can see, my electricity's just gone off. So I'm hoping that the generator's gonna come back on in a sec. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Good thing for my lovely virtual background. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop there. Over to you. I'm excited to be here. There we go.
Yeah, the light switched on, Mandy. Sorry. Okay, so cool. So then the first question is for Taylor in terms of, so Taylor, basically, I mean, just from an academic perspective, I guess, what actually is S.E.L? So what is social and emotional learning, and how can that help our students thrive? Just, I guess, yeah, basically, what are we talking about?
Sure. So it's a trickier question than it sounds, because there are so many different definitions of what S.E.L is. Actually, according to a recent study that was just conducted last year by Heather Schwartz and some of her colleagues, there are as many or even more than 134 different definitions and frameworks for S.E.L in published literature on the topic. So that means it's a tall task and not an easy one to give a simple sentence. But I like to think of S.E.L as the following. It's the ongoing process of internalizing socially constructed social emotional skills and mindsets. And so that's a pretty loaded definition, so I'll just unpack it a little bit. So the first thing is social emotional skills and mindsets. I actually like to call them practices. And those are ways that we think about, feel towards, and really engage with ourselves, each other, and the world. So you can think of, approaching our feelings with curiosity or approaching each other with kindness. And we usually think of these as adjectives, right? Curious people, kind people. But actually, social emotional skills and mindsets, like Josh very rightly said in his introduction, can be learned. And just as our brains are constantly shifting and creating new pathways throughout our lives, our social emotional competence actually increases and decreases in response to our experiences, our choices, and our habits. But this also is a little bit more nuanced because it does not mean that once we learn to practice kindness or once we learn to practice patience, that these are automatic skills or mindsets. Actually, they depend very much on the particular context that we're in and don't necessarily transfer automatically from one setting to the next. So for example, we might be really patient with our friends, but not so patient with our mom and dad at Thanksgiving dinner or whatever the situation may be. Thanksgiving is definitely on my mind, and I am very consciously trying to practice patience as I think about that upcoming family dinner. And so it's for that reason that I really like to refer to social emotional practices rather than just skills or beliefs, because they're verbs, right? They're things that we constantly need to be practicing, aware of, intentional in, rather than just things to think or skills that happen automatically. I also think it's important to realize that social emotional learning, this again ongoing process of internalizing these practices, can be for the better. They can be healthy, or they can be unhealthy. So in other words, we can learn racism or we can learn aggression just as much as we can learn empathy or patience or kindness. And so it's really only when these when these social emotional practices align with our own interests, our values, our needs, and also prepare us to be critically agentic in our communities, that SEL supports positive social transformation and personal development. I think it's also maybe just 3 more points related to what SEL is. SEL is also only part of the solution. So when we think about healthy social emotional development, yes, it is important for students to, or all of us, to practice gratitude for what we have. But we also need to be actively working against those external barriers that prevent unequal access to resources. So it's not enough just to say to students, okay, be grateful for what you have. We also, as educators, need to be very, very actively working against structural racism and discrimination that prevents people from having access to different sorts of resources that they might then be grateful for. Next, social emotional practices are socially constructed. So what this means is that what leadership means to Ari might be very different from what leadership means to me. What collaboration looks like in one community might look different from what collaboration looks like in another community. And even if we can agree that leadership and collaboration are priorities, right? That vision of what it looks like and what the component skills and mindsets are to practice that are going to be different. And so it's for that reason why it's so hard to say, these are the 5 social emotional learning goals that every school needs. These are the 10 skills and mindsets that students need to learn. And finally, we'll talk about this a bit later on, but SEL is an ongoing process. It's actually always happening. We're constantly learning from our surroundings, from our interactions, from our relationships, from our environment, from the prevailing social norms and routines. And so while this process is sometimes conscious and we're aware of the social emotional practices that we're learning, oftentimes it's unconscious. And, I think the case for why SEL matters, if you're on this call, you probably already to some extent believe that SEL is important. We know it intuitively that these soft skills are important, but there has been plenty of longitudinal research that shows that these sorts of qualities do powerfully predict not only academic, but also social, economic, psychological, and even physical well-being. And we also know that school-based SEL programs tend to show the largest impacts in economically disadvantaged student populations and school communities. So if you're interested in learning more about the case for SEL, I'll actually just throw a link into the chat. It's from S.E.L, which has compiled a really compelling case for SEL. So if you ever need to make that case to perhaps an administrator or a colleague in your school to get them on board, I would highly suggest this link as a resource.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Taylor, for sharing, how this broad world of SEL and just giving us a little view, a little peek into this world. It is such a broad world. And I was actually going to mention, take a look at S.E.L. They really try and break this down for us and help make it manageable, because otherwise it can just seem so overwhelming. But thank you, Taylor. Fantastic. Over to you, Mandy. Principal and a parent and a coach, all these different hats that you wear. Of the problems our kids and students are dealing with these days, and how can social emotional learning practices, as Taylor said, the practices, solve these problems or help alleviate these problems?
Okay, so just to reflect back, Ari, that I understand your question. So you're asking, what are some of the problems that our children and students are dealing with at the moment, and how can social and emotional practices solve these? Right? Okay. So with my conscious discipline lens, and I'm an international conscious discipline certified instructor, I know that there is one essential skill that is a better predictor for our children in their long-term success, better predictor than IQ or early reading or early maths. The same skill helps them to set and achieve goals. The same skill helps them to build and sustain healthy relationships and to stay true to their values. So what is this one essential skill? It's self-regulation. And self-regulation is a scientific term for resilience. And this is something that we bandy around all the time, this term resilience. And I'm interested to hear, if we've got time, what Taylor has to say about this. But I think for me, a big learning, and the lights are out again. Hopefully you can still hear me. I'll just carry on talking. I'm back. It's like a disco show, Ari. You thought I was just going to sing, but I'm actually got lights going as well. So this self-regulation and the value in this. How do we get self-regulated, resilient children? By having self-regulated, resilient adults. And so this is not about saying, here, teacher, here's a curriculum for you to roll out with your class. Here, parents, lecture your children more, and then they will certainly listen to you and tidy their bedrooms when you ask them to. This is about our lived experience. And when you're asking about what are the challenges that we're seeing, I think after kind of 19, 20 months of a global pandemic, I am seeing escalated levels of anxiety among children, among parents, among teachers, and the role of social and emotional learning has never been more important. Because in conscious discipline, we talk about the optimal state for learning is high challenge and low stress. And what are we doing? We're escalating the stress and we're escalating the challenge because we're like, Taylor, I know your academic years run different to ours. Ours run from January to December. And teachers are saying, we need to get children ready for the next school year. Parents are saying, but they've missed so much school. What can we do? And we're seeing sort of behaviors, paranoia, isolation, excess anxiety, lack of emotional regulation. And all of those sort of, for me, tie into the skill of self-regulation, which is literally just the ability to press pause between the stimulus and the action. And I know we've spoken a little bit about mindsets, and I'm going to share my screen quickly with you here, because this is the essence of conscious discipline. Let me just do my presenter view and then share the screen here. So conscious discipline says if we look at our adult mindsets, what are your mindsets around things like behavior management, around control, around respect? And how do we look at our mindsets, challenge them where they are no longer serving us, so we can upgrade our skill sets and change the culture of the school? I love what we've been saying about the fact that this is a practice. This is a daily. This is about how we engage with each other. It's about how we speak to the various members of our school family, not just our colleagues, whoever it is in our community. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, Ari, but I think it's really in the lived experience, and it's about role modeling that self-regulation in our day-to-day interactions. How do you respond when things are not going your way? How are you role modeling being able to take that deep breath when you feel triggered? And how are you then going to respond in a more mindful way? Because our children are watching us all the time. One more quick thing about self-regulation. The relationship between parents is more significant for a child's development of self-regulation than the relationship between the adult and the child. So I'm going to say that again because it's epic for our parents that are listening. The relationship between parents is more significant for the development of a child's self-regulation, that amazing skill that helps us predict our long-term success professionally and personally, is more significant for a child. How mum and dad, or mum and mum, or dad and dad, how they treat each other is more significant than how the parent treats the child, because it's in that lived experience. How do they problem solve? How do they talk to each other? How do they respect each other? And so self-regulation.
Sure, thanks, Mandy. I mean, that's so profound what you're saying. And I think really, and one of my roles tonight is really to try and bring things together and to tie them. So I think really the themes that we're starting to see is that there's no quick fix, in the sense that, it's not like you can tell a teacher, oh, do this with the kids, and then bam, everyone's going to be great. It's like, it's going to come from the home. It's going to come from who the teachers are, not just, the people they're trying to pretend to be in a class, if, that's what might be happening. But like, it has to fundamentally be who you are, because that's how it's going to permeate, to the kids. And really, we have to be leaders in that. And therefore, I think it speaks to a lot. And I want to get your thoughts on this, Taylor, in terms of, from a research perspective, like, obviously, we speak a lot about lifelong learning. And I think, obviously, it's, we're talking about a call to the adults. But how, as adults, can we be more intentional? What does the research say about us being, how do we kind of really step up to that leadership role of kind of modeling these practices for our kids? And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, a few. And Mandy, I could not agree with you more. And Josh, I think that's perfectly summarized. Yes, who we are is just as, if not more important than what we do in the classroom, in our lives, personally, professionally. Could not agree with you more. And I'll back that up with a few interesting, with some academic literature. When we think about modeling or talk about modeling in an academic sense, it's often equated with a think aloud, right? So when we model in a math class, we think about, maybe the teacher talking out loud as they're working through, a one variable equation. But in the context of S.E.L, it's often implicit. We're not saying, I am trying to model patience right now, so I am taking a deep breath before I respond to you, right? We're just doing it, which makes it, has its benefits and disadvantages. It means we're probably oftentimes not as aware of what we're doing and the lessons that we're implicitly giving our students. And like Mandy said, I think we know this. We know that modeling matters. We know it intuitively. This kind of practice what you preach expression, or James Baldwin. He famously said, "Children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them." And so we know this culturally, personally, intuitively. I'm sure each of us can think of a role model in our life who has helped form, how we carry ourselves and who we are. But in the psychological world, it's also been proven by some pretty interesting experiments. I'm thinking of Albert Bandura. He is a famous social psychologist who, in the 1960s, was pretty radical, because at the time, psychologists didn't think that people learn from watching each other. They thought that people only learn from direct experience. However, Albert Bandura conducted this really interesting experiment called the Bobo doll experiment. And if you're not familiar with it, I'd encourage you. There's some fascinating clips on YouTube. But basically, he had adults in one room, children in another room with a mirror, so the children could see what the adults were doing. And in the room with the adults was this big blow-up clown. Okay, and he had the adults beat up this clown as the children were watching him through this mirror. So, okay, we can talk about how ethical this sort of experiment is nowadays, but this is what happened. So then the adults left the room, and the children came into the room, and they just watched. Okay, what are the children going to do in this room with all sorts of stimuli, not just the clown. There's also drawing material, pencils, markers, whatever. And many of the children started beating up the clown, not always in exactly the same way that the adults were, but also kind of riffing on their form of aggression by kicking the clown, sometimes even like picking up a ruler and like whacking the clown. So anyway, this goes back to this idea that like, right, social emotional learning happens just by watching each other. And again, it can be healthy or unhealthy. So children can pick up on your aggression, your impatience, just as they can your impatience or your conscientiousness. And so, in what he concluded from that was that, we are always learning from our environment. Much of human learning is vicarious by watching each other, and our thoughts and behaviors are constantly being shaped by our environment. And so when we think of school, teachers are very much part of students' learning environment. And so students, therefore, are constantly learning from what teachers are doing, whether they're aware of it or not. We also know from later research that we are most likely to imitate role models who we see as similar to us. And so I think, at least in the US, our teaching, there's a large mismatch. We have a largely white teaching force in many, especially in our urban districts, where we have mostly Black and brown school children. And so this is why, at least in our context, recruiting a more diverse teaching force is really important. So students have role models who they're able to see themselves reflected in. And we also know that we're more likely to imitate behaviors that seem feasible to us. Otherwise, we might just admire somebody for doing something, but not necessarily replicate it ourselves. And so, I think this is a long way to get back to your question, Josh, about how do we so what do we do as teachers, as school leaders, to make sure that healthy S.E.L. is happening rather than unhealthy S.E.L. And I think exactly what you said, first being aware of what we're doing is so important. So having potentially a mindfulness practice, or just being able to pause while you're teaching, between classes, and just reflect on, how am I doing? How am I holding myself? How am I carrying myself today? What am I feeling frustrated with? What's going well? What's not working so well? Just being aware of what we're doing and how we're interacting first is crucial. And then taking that next step towards self-regulation and saying, okay, this is where I am. How do I want to be? So maybe I'm feeling impatient right now. Can I reset my intention so that I have practicing patience on the forefront of my mind as I go into this next class period? And I think, there are a few different structures that can help with that sort of intention setting. Again, if you practice mindfulness, there are mindfulness traditions, mindfulness intention setting practices. There's also one called Whoop, which I'll stick that link in the chat as soon as I'm done talking, because I'm a pretty bad multitasker. But that is basically kind of a 4-step process where you set a wish and then eventually kind of, reflect on that wish, why it's important to you, what's standing in the way of you fulfilling that wish, and then create a plan for overcoming that. So, perhaps my wish is to practice patience. I know it's important to me, but my obstacle is that, I'm just really tired right now, and I'm just, being set off by everything and everyone. And so my plan is that, in the next 5-minute break, I'm going to try to go and take a power nap, or whatever it may be, large or small. So I think there are different sorts of ways to practice that intentionality, but I think awareness and intentionality are key for educators.
Wow, thank you so much for that answer. And I'm absolutely loving this discussion. Someone asked in the Q&A, how do we actually practically start using these in the classroom? This is a little bit of what I do. And I think, we're going to get to that later. But for me personally, what I love doing as Happy Schools is bringing in those micro mindfulness moments, I like to call them, into our classroom, and just taking a moment to stop and breathe. As a teacher, we often running from class to class, and I speak so much to teachers just about taking a moment just to eat. just to drink, make sure you have enough water, make sure you just stop before you go into a class and sit with the students for a couple of seconds and just breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And as someone who myself struggles with impulse control, and I get so excited and, can move everywhere, this is something I found has helped. So moving on from this, because I think all these questions flow quite nicely. Mandy, I think the biggest thing is that so many teachers, we've just got, our plates are full. Our plates are absolutely full. We're running from pillar to post every single couple of seconds. Some days as teachers, you can run and not even have a chance to eat or to breathe or to, get any sort of headspace, because at break you're doing this, or recess you're doing this, and you're trying to kind of manage everything. And I wanted to ask you is, how do we make intentional time in our day and our homes to practice social emotional learning? And I think if we can just discuss this, and kind of the second part of this question is, how can we actually, as adults, educators, leaders, coaches, begin our own social emotional learning journey when it can seem quite daunting?
It's a beautiful question. Thank you, Ari. And for me, this has really been about tuning into my inner speech, because research shows that 77% of the way that we talk to ourselves is negative. And I believe that that's the starting point of being aware. Because if your default, and conscious discipline, this is a much longer conversation, so just in a nutshell, conscious discipline says state dictates behavior, and all behavior is communication. So disruptive behavior or disrespectful behavior or even disengaged behavior, that's communication. I was talking to a colleague today about a little guy in her class, and he's having a hard time. And discouraged children are disruptive. Disconnected children are dangerous to themselves and to others. And so conscious discipline is based on safety, connection, and problem solving. And why I love it so much is because it's a comprehensive self-regulation program. It's not just like, oh, now, children, we're doing an assembly or a meeting on how to respect each other. It's in those lived experiences, as I've said before, in that day to day. And it's about having those gratitude practices. We start every staff meeting with a gratitude practice. We have celebrations. We have wish wells, and they are now embedded in the culture of our school family. And so when somebody is having a hard time and a teacher says, guys, or children or students, Mandy's having a really hard time, what can we do in this moment? Spontaneously, these little people will put their hands on their hearts, because we know that in that moment, no amount of words really help. And we tend to talk too much as adults. I was watching a mum and dad walking, well, I assume it's a mum and dad, walking with their 2-year-old. And the dad came up behind her, or mum was walking with a little girl, and dad sort of went boo behind her. And her feet slid out from under her, and she sort of fell, and she got such a fright. And her dad picked her up, and he said, you're okay, nothing's wrong. Because I think the dad was sort of quite overwhelmed that he'd seemingly caused or triggered this anxiety in her. And I maintain, so going back to the fact that this is about our inner speech, we were never taught these skills. And you teach as you were taught, you parent as you were parented, you do your best until you know better. And so it's in the language that we use, it's in how we are able to sit with our own discomfort, our own big feelings. And I loved what Taylor said about being able to think out loud. It's conscious discipline says we become commentators. We shift from judging to noticing. And so you just almost become a narrator for what you are seeing in your child's behavior. Another little guy, really, he cut his head open today. Actually, it was quite bad. He ran into a jungle gym. And between his class teacher and I, we just wanted to talk and kind of distract him and take up the space, because we ourselves were triggered. And I took a deep breath. And Ari, just now, when you were taking a deep breath, I felt my mirror neurons were tuning into yours. And we know with conscious discipline that state dictates behavior. And when you're in a survival state or in an emotional state, that is unconscious. And so no amount of adults saying to children, use your words, or what's wrong, or how do you feel, they can't actually articulate how they feel because they don't have access to that language component. So just being able to sit with that, to sit with them. And so to answer your question, again, it's just in the role modeling. It's in the saying in a staff meeting when a teacher says, wow, I'm having a really hard time, not brushing over it or saying, this is how you fix it. Because we never saying, judge me. We're saying, see me. Children are never saying, give me a score out of 10. They're saying, see me. And we know that when we really listen with empathy, the same parts of our brain light up when we feel loved and when we feel heard. And what I'm noticing, Ari and Josh and Taylor, is that there's a lot of people that are feeling invisible. And you talk, Ari, about that teacher just being like, go, 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 go. They needing to be seen. They needing to be acknowledged, because we only ever hear of the email from what we're not doing right. People they're not taking time to give their teachers the feedback to say, you're doing it. I'm grateful for you being a safe keeper for my child in the classroom. So I've got a lot to say, as you can hear, on the subject, but it's kind of normalizing the discomfort of the anxiety. I don't believe there's any such thing as an anxious child or a non-anxious child or an anxious adult or not. Anxiety is a sensation that we feel when we're not able to name the feeling. And that's why I love your mood meter as well, Ari, being able to say, I feel scared, I feel overwhelmed, I feel really frustrated. All of a sudden you take a bit of that sting out because you're able to pinpoint. And that we have to do in the role modeling. And the amount of parent workshops that I do, and parents say to me, but I can't show my feelings to my child. Like, I've got to go down the passage and have a little cry or feel angry. And I say, then challenge the parents to say, what is the message that you're giving to your children? Is that it's not okay for them to feel their feelings. And obviously we need to have boundaries, and we need to self-regulate as well to be able to say, wow, I'm feeling really triggered. I'm going to take a deep breath and calm myself down so that I can help my brain to think clearly. And so, yeah, this is a journey. There's no quick fixes. And it's in our lived experiences, in our day-to-day interactions, and we are all learning all the time. And to be able to say, oops, I made a mistake, is again role modeling for our students and our colleagues that it's okay not to be okay. It's okay not to have it all together all the time. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Mandy. There's so much there, and I think what you spoke about, labeling it as a journey. And this is where, so obviously, and I think really the pattern that's coming across is, we know this isn't a quick fix, but at the same time, we also have very clear understanding that it is a journey. Now, what's exciting about that is, and I think this is where a lot of people get stuck in life, from a psychological perspective. And by the way, for those, I do have my master's in psychology, so I'm not just making stuff up. That is, I forgot to mention that. One of the things that we've seen, and I think this is fundamental, when I worked as a behavior economist. So what we kind of, psychology and behavior economics have really discovered is that people default. That's the fundamental. So talking about a journey, what happens to a lot of people is that they're either not aware there is a journey. So I think tonight we're now all fundamentally aware of the fact that there is a journey. But then B, every time a lot of us kind of, either we're on the journey and we don't kind of know where we are, and so we think we're not in the journey, and then we kind of give up and kind of go back to our defaults and do whatever we were doing before, or we're on the journey and we keep doing it, but we never kind of feel like we're making progress, or we're not really understanding about whether in fact we are on this journey, even though we may be on it. And so the question that I want to direct to you, Taylor, from an academic perspective, and I think this is where, this is what I looked at in my thesis. There was this paper by Angela Duckworth, your mentor, and she spoke about that measurement matters, this idea that, like, obviously we all know, if you can't measure something, it's so hard to speak about it. But when it comes to S.E.L, it's so difficult. But that being said, there are definitely ways, and maybe if you can share some of the research on how do we measure it in our kids? How do we measure it in ourselves? How do we understand that if we're on this journey, as Mandy said, how do we know that, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Are we, as you said, how do I know whether I'm still being kind? How do we track these things within ourselves?
Yeah. Well, having a degree in developmental psychology helps. So I'll say that. But I also, similar to your question about, what is S.E.L, it's a deceptively simple question. There aren't a lot of easy answers when it comes to measuring S.E.L. There are just a lot of questions, and so I will pose some of those questions and try my best to think aloud about a few of them. But with every system, with any measurement system, any system in general, there are advantages and limitations, and so. I think when it comes to measuring S.E.L, outcomes, practices, some of the difficulties that we experience, and any educator again knows these just from experience, but I'll put words to a few of them. One is that, like I said earlier, social emotional practices are socially constructed. So that means, what Ari sees as patience might look different from what I see as patience. They can mean different things to different people. Also, like we talked about, social emotional practices aren't necessarily automatically transferable across contexts. So just because I'm able to be a leader or practice leadership in this one situation doesn't mean I am a leader. It doesn't mean I will always be a leader or always practice leadership in the same way in other situations. And then, a third and equally important question is, why are we trying to measure social emotional learning outcomes? Just being aware of our purpose behind the measurement is so important, because if it is for accountability, if it is for assigning students a grade, that can lead to extrinsic motivation, which risks, a social desirability bias, which means basically, I might fake leadership because I know that my teacher wants me to, or I might pretend to be a great collaborator, but that's not really authentic, and that's not what I'm going to do as soon as I leave this classroom. So those are just a few challenges to measuring S.E.L, and so a few thoughts that I have about these challenges. Again, these are all very much in the process, and I'm sure, just the folks on this call have so much wisdom of experience that I would love to hear from all of you. But my thinking around these challenges is, one, because these practices mean different things to different people, I think the first important step to measuring any outcome is creating a collective and contextualized vision of what the practice looks like and what it doesn't look like in our particular context. So talking about, as a school, as a classroom, if patience is our priority, what does it look like and what doesn't it look like? And co-constructing that vision together is so important. And then once you have those kind of visible, tangible markers of what it looks like and what it doesn't look like, then you're able to, set up a sort of rubric or a sort of scale, again, that is contextualized and relevant to, that particular community. In terms of, social emotional practice, in response to the challenge of the transferability of these practices, I think when possible, and again, the limitation here is time and money, which, is always lacking in the field of education. But I would say, collecting multiple people's input can be so helpful. So doing like a sort of 360-degree feedback where you're having students reflect on, where they are in their social emotional learning journey, or where they are specifically in relation to practicing patience. Also having teachers report on what they're seeing in the student in terms of practicing patience, having their peers offer the same feedback, offer their families the same opportunity to give that feedback, so that we can begin to kind of construct this more holistic understanding of where we are in our journey, in what spaces, right? Where we're doing well and where we're struggling, because it's very likely that we're doing well in some places and we're just struggling to transfer that same practice to other spaces. And then, a last important thing is think about, once you have that data, what do you do with it? This is sort of data is in the article that you mentioned, Josh, Measurement Matters. Angela argues that this sort of data isn't useful for diagnosis. It's much more useful to prompt self-reflection and practice improvement. So it's equally important to think about, not just how am I going to measure these practices, but then what am I going to do once I have that information? And again, just two other thoughts related to measurement. It's important to design opportunities for students to actually practice and show their competency of these social emotional practices. Oftentimes students aren't collaborating on a task, or you're not seeing collaboration because the task itself doesn't really necessitate collaboration, right? So you have to make sure that the tasks that you're designing and asking of students are actually like authentic opportunities for them to practice these practices. And then finally, like I said, just being really cognizant as you collect the data, before you collect the data, what are you going to do? How are you going to act on it?
Wow, thank you so much. That answer, definitely creating the correct interventions when we got that data is so vital. And if anyone in the audience needs, resources around this, please feel free to reach out to me, which I will be putting my email in a resource sheet, or to any one of the fantastic panelists, to help understand this, how we can actually develop and put these interventions in place, which we will get to very soon. I am cognizant of the time that it is getting late, so we're going to be asking 3 more questions and then we'll be wrapping up. Want to ask Mandy this one and say, a large part of social emotional learning requires developing relationships with our students. This is something that I put a huge emphasis on, as I said in the beginning, doing those check-ins, understanding where the kids are at. Mandy, I've seen on your social media, doing TikToks and actually get involved with what the students are doing. And I would love to ask you is, how do we actually build those relationships as educators with the correct boundaries to ensure that we've got these relationships so learning can happen, but also that we don't cross any boundaries that are potentially inappropriate?
Great question. Thank you, Ari. So it's important to say that in traditional discipline, we believe that rules govern behavior. And if you just have the right carrot or the right sticker chart or the right reward or the right threat, that you can make children behave. That's what traditional discipline says. Conscious discipline says relationships and connections govern behavior, and the only person that you can make change is yourself. So relationships and connections govern behavior. And I think it's really interesting what you are asking, Ari, about boundaries. And that, for me, comes down to your intention. If your intention is to connect authentically with a child or a student where they're at, to build those relationships, to find something in common with them, to be able to really connect with them in a way that you build the trust, you build safety and connection, then yeah, I like to believe that I'm eternally optimistic that people do have the right intentions, and certainly it's something that I'm aware of with my own children. I didn't mention I'm a mum of a 12-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old son. My son turned 15 on Saturday. Can you believe it? I've got a 15-year-old child. And I want to trust that the adults in these spaces have got their best interests at heart. And so I think it's about instilling in your children, again, this comes down to tuning into those emotions and helping them trust their gut. Like, if something about this doesn't feel right, what do I do? Who can I talk to? And so we change our job descriptions at the Ridge and with the teachers that I work with. So it's not, we change our old job description is my job is to tell you what to do and your job is to try not make my job a nightmare, to my job is to keep you safe and your job is to help keep it safe. So we concentrate on that safety all the time. And the thing with particularly with foundation phase teachers or I think they call them elementary teachers in the US, Taylor, sort of working with children between the ages of kind of 5 and 9, is that we get very attached to the children. But guess what? You may not be that student's person. It may be a coach. It may be the receptionist. It may be the lady that works in the kitchen. And that's when we've got to kind of relinquish our control of saying, if you are not that student's safekeeper or you're not their person, when they feel triggered, who can they go to? And that's just about, again, just having a more open mind about not just to say, these are my children and I'm going to, hold on to them, about saying, who do you feel safe with? And by focusing on that safety, Ari, all the time, and saying, like, what about this feels safe in my head, in my heart, in my body, then you're empowering children also to start having conversations around bigger issues as they get older, things around consent. And again, our adults and parents don't know how to have these conversations with children around firstly, even how they feel, and secondly, around what are they dealing with on their devices? What are they dealing with in their relationships? I sat with a little boy today, a 9-year-old, who's having some hectic WhatsApp conversations with another student. And I said to him, have you spoken to your parents? And he just started crying. He said, I'm so scared that I'm going to get into trouble. And so I think that this is really a shout out to our parents, if you are listening, and to me first, because I don't do this well enough with my own children, is to, when we are forming those connections, Ari, connections are made up of 4 components: eye contact, physical touch with your own children, not now with COVID. So eye contact, physical touch, being present. Being present. So many children tell me how distracted the adults around them are. And it's an indictment on us as an adult cohort. Because we are parenting on autopilot and teaching on autopilot for a lot of the time. And then the 4th component is in a playful space. And those 4 components of connection, eye contact, physical touch. Before COVID, it was the fist bump, it was the high five, it was the hug with somebody that you feel safe with. Being present in a playful space. Those 4 components of connection help to wire our brains for willingness and self-control. So that was a very long answer to your question, but it's about helping children to trust their instinct, and it's about adults also just knowing that connections govern behavior, not rules, not threats, connections.
Thanks, Mandy. And it's such a beautiful theme in what you've been doing in terms of really highlighting the roles of us as conscious beings. I guess that's, the conscious discipline seeping through. And in terms of, that's one area to work on, is who are we? How are we interacting with our kids? How are we interacting with our partners? How are we interacting with ourselves? And, so I think that's the first sort of really powerful element. And to kind of now take it to Taylor on the opposite end, which I think, almost two different, almost models of attack, if you will, if you want to put it that way. But, in terms of, so something that I think is, you mentioned kind of projects and building things and doing things in the community. Obviously, project-based learning has become a huge, S.E.L sort of thinking. So if you can just very briefly, just obviously, with the time that we have, like how do we bring project-based learning into the classroom so that, we can also start having our kids, not just, that we're actually solving it from multiple avenues, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. I think there is so much promise in project-based learning, and the faculty at Penn have a very robust framework about what project-based learning is. There are plenty of certificate programs and resources at our school on project-based learning, but really, the fundamental elements of project-based learning are that you're working collaboratively on an authentic problem that has very disciplinary connections or academic connections and is iterative, right? So you're working on something, then you're reflecting on how did it go, and then you're revisiting and you're trying again. And I think that project-based learning is a wonderful way of building leadership, collaboration, critical thinking. But it's also not the only avenue to build these sorts of soft skills. Again, I really want, to come back and revisit, what's the purpose and what are your driving goals? Project-based learning is wonderful if you're focused on collaboration and leadership, and, skills that you can embed into that process. But there are other soft skills that you might be prioritizing that aren't necessarily only achieved through project-based learning. So I'll just quickly share my screen and show a helpful framework that I like to use. I won't talk too much about it because I'm aware of the time, but this is a framework created by an organization called Transforming Education that lays out 6 different ways of integrating S.E.L into an academic classroom. I think we've spent a lot of this conversation talking about the importance of thoughtful modeling that Mandy's spoken about, we've both spoken about. And project-based learning kind of fits into this practice opportunity, right? Creating authentic opportunities for students to practice some of these soft skills. There are other ways to create practice opportunities. If your priority is teaching mindfulness, then maybe having a meditation minute at the beginning of class is a more important practice opportunity for you to integrate rather than project-based learning. Also thinking about conducive environments. How am I physically setting up space, creating space that to facilitate social emotional practices? Are students sitting separately or are they sitting together? What am I showcasing on the walls? Am I celebrating student success? In order to foster a culture of pride and celebration, or am I, have names written on the board of students who are in trouble? How is the physical space reflecting the social emotional practices that I want my students to learn? Going back, exactly to what Mandy just talked about, how am I creating strong relationships, not just between myself and students, but also between students, creating mentorship opportunities for students to offer and seek help from one another is really an important way of bringing S.E.L into the classroom. And then also explicit instruction, right? Having mini lessons once in a while on what is resilience and why does it matter and why is it important. So all of these things, project-based learning is important, and it's a piece of a larger puzzle as we think about how to integrate S.E.L into our classrooms.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Taylor. We are going, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. I see there's one there, but while we are just giving people opportunity to quickly post in the Q&A, I'd love to just ask our panelists, what is your favorite S.E.L practice? This is practical that we can put into the classroom. I love one called 2 wishes and a star, where we go into the classroom and we say, what are 2 wishes you have? sorry, 2 stars and a wish. Okay, 2 stars, 2 things you are grateful for, and a wish, something that you wish will be, that will happen in the future. And you'll see that your students will give you the most amazing answers. So Mandy, if you can address us first, then Taylor.
Okay, so because I love little people, tiny humans, I'm going to share this with you, and I'm actually going to stop my virtual background because it might interfere with what I'm showing you. So in conscious discipline, one of the structures that we have as part of the self-regulation program are the feeling buddies. And so these 8 feeling buddies, they're like little gingerbread man, and they're mini buddies, and you get bigger ones for like a classroom setting. And because self-regulation takes 2, your higher self talking to your low, and I talk to myself all the time, or we all do, and we usually have one voice. If you've got multiple voices, maybe see a psychiatrist, but we generally talk to ourselves in our heads all the time, right? So this is a tool, quickly, Ari, this is a tool that helps to name the feeling and then to be able to regulate it. So it comes with a book that says Helping My Feeling Buddies, and I just want to quickly show you what anger says. Sometimes I feel angry. When I feel angry, I help my feeling buddy named angry. First, I get angry from its home and we look at each other face to face. And anyway, I mean, I'm not going to go through the whole story, but it's like hold angry close. And Josh is laughing his head off. Don't know why. We hold angry close. And I say, breathe with me, angry. You wanted things to go differently. That's why we feel angry. Look at that. Look at that message. How many adults are driving around wherever who have got anger management, who have been told you're not allowed to be angry, or, suck it up, or big boys don't cry, or this like toxic masculinity that is just so unhealthy for our society. And I just think, yeah. Sorry, that was a long answer to your question. I think having something like a practical tool like that can say, wow, you're feeling really sad. Let's help our feeling buddy named sad. And so you then make it that regulation program, the regulation process that takes 2.
Mandy, I feel like this is the story of the conversation where you come with like the beauty and the cuteness, and then I come in with like the theory. But sure, in line with keeping in line with how it's been going, I will propose something a bit more teacher facing. I love the angry buddies, and perhaps this is a resource that I find useful for teachers. It's a backwards planning template that you can use to think about how you're going to integrate S.E.L. into your classroom. So it walks you through the backwards design process that we as teachers, at least teachers in the US, are quite familiar with, where you think about your goal and then you break it down into skills and component mindsets and such. Then you think about the metrics of success, and then you think about your strategies for bringing it into the classroom. And so this is a template that I created that follows that process for social emotional learning goals, but also incorporates a lens of criticality to that process. So rather than just me as the teacher, deciding what social emotional practices are important to me, again, how can we co-construct that vision with students as a school community? So a lot of what we talked about in today's conversation, trying to bring that all together for to help teachers think through, how they're going to actually do the work of S.E.L. in their classrooms. But I love the feeling buddies, and thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna get some for myself, maybe, Mandy.
Amazing. Thank you so much for those warm and wholehearted responses. So just we've got 2 questions over here. One from Lior. Hi, Lior. So nice to see you. So she says, thank you so much for a wonderful and informative session. S.E.L. is such an important part of education. The question I have is, S.E.L. may surface difficult emotions, thoughts in students. Would having teachers, educators implement an S.E.L. without the proper, formal and practical psychological training to deal with difficult emotions or thoughts pose potential challenges that could be harmful?
I would love Taylor to take that one, please, Taylor.
I was going to call on you because you're the one who does this work with teachers and students. But okay, very quickly, I will say yes, it can. And this is why it takes a school community that is invested in S.E.L. To really pull it off well. Because when those difficult emotions arise, yes, teachers, you might be on the front line of that. So, really listening to what Mandy said, having teachers who are in tune with themselves and can sit with those difficult emotions, it can sit with that student as that first life vest for them is so important. And having a school psychologist or counselor or even references in your community who can come in and provide more targeted a deeper level of psychological support for those students is really ideal.
And Ari Sundari, who is also from the US, my friend, is asking, she says, does the culture of the adult play an important role when we work with S.E.L, with children? And so I know that there's not an opportunity for her to elaborate on that question, but does anybody on the panel have an answer to that?
I would say it very much does. Culture informs, what we think is important, what we think these different social emotional practices look like, how we envision them, how we go about trying to execute them, what are the available resources and constraints that are available to us as we try to live out these social emotional practices. So I would say yes, very much, and being aware of and reflective of how culture might be informing our social emotional teaching and learning practice is an important step in bringing awareness and intentionality to our practice.
Fantastic, thank you. And our last question is, I would like to know how to incorporate this in a homeschooling environment. Mandy, maybe you can speak to
yeah.
Is it the same?
I have no experience with this, but I can imagine that the theory, because it's about the practice, it would be the same whether you were in a classroom environment with 30 students or in a homeschooling environment, because again, it's about the adult first, child second. You can't teach skills you don't have. And so if composure is a skill that you're wanting to teach your child in a homeschool environment, then that's again what we're needing to be role modeling then within a homeschool environment.
Yeah, and if I can maybe just add to that, like from behavior economics, one of the most important principles is this idea of choice architecture, where basically you construct environments in ways that you help people to default to kind of the right behaviors. So, on a very practical level, it means if you know that as a parent, your child, gets very distracted by the TV and you get irritated by them, don't learn by the TV. Kind of thing. And it's really just a basic example. If you know that you and your child fight when you're both hungry, then be intentional about having a snack before you start learning. So I think it's just creating environments that allow you to kind of consciously model those processes and get the right defaults that you want for you and your child.
Wonderful, wonderful. I feel like we could sit for hours and hours and hours, and I'm just conscious of everyone's time, and that's the only reason I'm saying we need to end. But this has been so informative and so powerful. So thank you so much. What we're going to do is just have a poll very quickly as everyone goes out. Tova is going to quickly put up a poll just to help us get some data and help us to understand a few ideas of what you enjoyed in this. So Tova will put it up right now.
I think, Ari, if everyone wants to do it on the way out, I've scheduled it for the way out on next.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Okay, fantastic. So on the way out, you will get that survey. Thank you so much, Tova. And just from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank everyone for being here. All of the attendees, it was so special, having you and the engagement on the chat and getting involved with the questions. As I said, we will send out a resource sheet with the recording and with ways to contact and to learn more about this, but ways to also contact your panelists. Feel free to follow us on social media. I know that Mandy's very active on Facebook and Instagram as the connection coach. Taylor is active on Twitter. I'm active as a little bit that you can follow over there, and I'm very active on Facebook and Instagram as Happy Schools. So we're going to send those through. But a massive thank you to our panelists, to Mandy and to Taylor. You guys are absolutely amazing. You're powerhouses, and you're really leading the educational revolution. It is an honor and a privilege to be with you. Thank you for sharing your hearts. Thank you for sharing your heads. Thank you for sharing your animated and lovely way of being, Mandy. And Taylor, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insight. A massive thank you to Josh for always making time to try and further education. And I don't know what I'd do without you. So everyone on the way out, if you can please fill out that survey form. Otherwise, this is the first of, please God, many trainings by Happy Schools, many webinars, and we look so forward to seeing you soon. Have a beautiful evening.